In this video, I'm going to go over how to get started with Portainer and use it to manage Docker containers. Okay, but before we get started, I will mention that you will need to install Docker for desktop for your particular machine. I have a Mac, of course, so I'm using Docker for desktop for Mac and the current version. I'll provide a link in the description below on how to install that. All right, so let's get started. All you got to do is click on the installation link from the Portainer.io website. And the first thing you'll find is a standalone Linux Docker host. Now, I'm using a Mac, but Docker for Desktop for Mac is actually running a Linux VM called Moby Linux. And when you create any kind of Docker container on a Mac, it's not running on the Mac. It's running on that VM, or in that VM. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this first line here. Okay, so then we're going to paste it into the terminal. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a Docker volume. And this is so that Portainer can store its data and this data can persist. That way, if I upgrade the Portainer version and I, remove the container and I grab the latest image and instantiate a container from that, the data will still be available for it. It makes upgrades very easy. So I'm going to hit enter. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to copy the docker run command. And what the docker run command does is it's going to run the Portainer container, run it in daemon mode. It's going to port forward 8,000 to the internal 8,000 and port forward the host 9,000 to the internal 9,000. It's going to give the running container a name of Portainer. And if I restart the computer, the host, it's set to restart always. So when the Docker engine starts up again, it'll automatically start up again. Portainer will. Then it's setting the volumes for the local Docker host Docker sock into the internal one so that it can communicate with Portainer itself. And then it's also setting a volume mapping for the Portainer data that's on the host to the internal Docker Portainer data directory. And the last part is it's grabbing the Portainer image from the official Docker Hub. All right, so let's hit enter. Okay, let's check if it's running. Docker PS, it is. Let's go back to our browser. Localhost 9,000. Since this is the first time we're running Portainer, it's going to ask us to give it a username and password. I'm going to leave admin as a username. And I'm going to give it a password, enter it twice. This creates the user. The next option is, so you can use Portainer to manage other Docker hosts. I only have one, so I'm going to use local. But you can also see that you can run an agent on a Docker host, or you can also connect to Azure so that you can create a container instance. For this video, I'm just going to use local because I tend to use Portainer for running my home lab Docker stuff, or managing it actually. So I'll leave it at that. Click on connect. All right, so now that we know that we have our local Docker host already listed here, if we would have added more Docker hosts, we would see a list of them here. But again, this is my machine, so I only have one. I'm going to hit dismiss here. And on the left hand side, we have a blade, the home blade, which is the one we're seeing now. Extensions blade, which allows you to install RBAC, external authentication, registry manager, and other things, I'm sure. I don't use any of those. I'm a one-man shop, so I don't need any of that. But if you feel the need to use this in your development lab with other people, you can definitely set that up. In fact, the next blade, users, allows you to add multiple users to this. as well as if your group is big enough, you can set up teams and you can set up your own custom RBAC model. Okay, so for endpoints, again, I only have one endpoint, which is my local host, the same host that this Portainer is running on. You can set up groups, tags. I'm not going to use any of that. You can also connect remote registries. For example, like if you have Azure Cloud Registry, you can connect that here, but I'm not. But you could. And then, of course, settings. This is more detailed settings that I won't be using, as well as other security settings, edge computing, all that kind of stuff. I'm not using any of it. Authentication Blade gives you the ability to connect this Portainer instance to LDAP or OAuth. Don't need that myself. And of course, about, if you want to get news. But let's go back to the home blade and let's click on our instance, our own local instance. You can see that it already has a container, it has images, network stuff, resources. So this is going to mirror whatever is set for your Docker host. So I have 4 processors and I'm allocating 2 gigs of RAM. I'm using a Mac Mini with 16 gigs of RAM, so I could actually allocate more. But the kind of stuff I do is very lightweight anyway, so I don't need to. If I feel the need to change this, I can, but I'm not. So, but if you do, you would need to set it from your Docker desktop. So if I go over here to Docker and click on Preferences, you can see that here are those resources that are reflected over here on Portainer. And right here it's showing you that it's running Portainer. Interesting. I had not seen that before. Okay, so what are some of the other things? So once you go into a instance, then you're given more blades on the left-hand side. The first one is App Templates. And I think that's one of the cool things about Portainer is that it comes with templates that you can use so that if you just want to spin something up real quick, you can. So you can host a Docker registry, Nginx, set up a web server, database servers, GitLab, SQL Server, Redis, some content management systems, Jenkins, WordPress, Nexus. Now, you're not limited to these. Now, these are just templates that come built in, or you can still run either your own Docker Compose, which we'll take a look at in a bit, or use Docker Hub images here as well. We'll do that as well. So now we're going to click on Stacks over here. And Stacks is what allows you to use a Docker Compose. So actually, if you just click on it, you can already start either editing directly on this, or you can upload a Docker Compose, or you can point to a Git Repo, give it the branch you want to grab the Docker Compose from. So Stacks allows you to use containers using Docker Compose. The next one is containers. Right now we're only running one container in here, so it's itself. I could actually probably even select it and delete it, and then it would just stop running, but I'm not. We'll go over adding another container. Images, so this is where you'll be able to access all the Docker images that are stored locally on this Docker host. You can pull images from here as well using Docker Hub, and I presume other registries, but we only have that one in there right now. Networks. This is if you want to customize your network layout or overlays. Volumes. So if you want to add your own custom volumes, you can come and do that here, or you can clean up whatever's in there. And then events gives you a list of all the things that have been done in this Portainer instance. So if you spin up a new container or you pull an image, everything will be logged here. And then of course host, which is the Docker host. So again, I'm using a Mac, and because I'm using a Mac, it uses Moby Linux. So you're not going to see, Darwin or anything like that here. It's going to say Linux. And that's because Moby is running as the Docker host within Mac OS. And the rest of the stuff I think we already went over. So let's go back to how to spin something up really quickly. So if we go to the app templates blade, the first thing I want to do is I want to bring up Jenkins. So I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to call this Jenkins. I'm going to leave it at bridge. Jenkins options, I'm going to leave that blank. I'm going to skip the access control. I'm going to show the advanced options, and that's because I want to specify the port that I want to forward. So you can see here that it automatically grabbed the exposed ports, 8080 and 50,000. 8080 is the web console, and 50,000 is Jenkins nodes, or they used to call them slaves, but so you can connect those to this Jenkins instance if you want to make it a master. So I'm going to put port 8080 and 50,000. Okay, the volume mapping is going to set it to var Jenkins home. That's fine. I'm not going to add any host entries. So let's go ahead and deploy this. There it goes, container successfully created. And now it brings us to the container list, and we see Jenkins. The state is running. We can see that it's published the ports 50,000 and 8080. Okay, so I can actually click on 8080. And we see that Jenkins is starting up. So we'll leave that alone for now. Oh, there it goes. And of course, for those of you who have set up Jenkins before, in order for you to start it up, you have to unlock it. So we're going to copy this directory here. And this will give me the opportunity to show you one of the nice things about Portainer. And that is that you can go to the quick actions over here. You'll see that there's a exec icon. And if we click on that, it'll actually allow you to attach a session into your running container instance. So let's click connect. And we're going to do a cat and then paste our path. And it gives us the password that we're going to use to unlock over here in Jenkins. Click continue. Click install suggested. We'll let that run. Okay, so let's go back to containers over here. Actually, let me disconnect first. Okay, so while that's happening, let's look at what it's doing. Under quick actions, you'll see that there's stats. So we can use this to look at resource utilization of the Docker container. It's currently using 400 megs of RAM. CPU utilization is 100%. Network usage. So we get quite a bit of statistics here, which is nice. You won't see that from the terminal, of course. So this is one of the nice little benefits of it, of Portainer. So let's go back to containers, to app templates, and let's go ahead and click on Nexus. We're going to set up a Nexus instance. Show options. Okay, it uses port 8081. I'm pretty sure I'm not using port 8081 on my local host. And it's going to create a volume called Nexus Data for persistence. And I'm going to go ahead and click deploy the container. Okay, now it says container successfully created, and now we can see that Nexus is running, and the official image that it's running from Sonatype, Nexus 3 latest, and the published ports. I'm not sure if it's done. Nope, it's not done starting up. So we'll give that a second. But let's go back to Jenkins over here. I'm going to set up my first user. Click on continue as admin. That's the URL. Save and finish. No, I don't want to save my password. Start using it, Jenkins. Okay, so I have a Jenkins instance running, which is a good way to set up pipelines. Let's go back to Portainer. Let's see where Nexus is at. Okay, now it's starting up. Let's click on sign in. Okay, so I guess they adopted the same thing as Jenkins. So we can go back over here to Portainer. We'll start off a little attach session. And we go to the Nexus data. And it's we're going to cat the admin.password. It's going to be this here. And we're in. Next. Okay. New password. No. Okay, so I've got my Nexus instance set up. So if we do a build, we can push to Nexus. Let's go back to app templates. I want to set up a Git repo. So we'll set up GitLab. Call it GitLab. Bridge. Show advanced options. Port 80. I'll give it 8082. And then 8443. Going to deploy the container. And GitLab is a little bit more heavy. So let's see how long that takes. Actually, I don't want to wait, so I'm just going to go over here. If we go back to our events, we should see all these things that I'm doing. Container, instance started. Okay, so I did an exec. I set up a bridge network, container created, the Nexus container. So it's giving us a nice little log here. But what if we don't want to use the built-in app templates and I don't have a Docker Compose? I just want to spin up something from Docker Hub, for example. So let's go to Docker Hub. And we're going to look for my TK4 minus Hercules Docker image. So I can go over here, copy this, go to Portainer, click on Add Container. I'm going to call it Hercules. Or TK4 actually, let's call it TK4. And then the image from Docker Hub. And I'm going to give it the ports I want to port forward. So 8038 is one of them. And also 3270. Okay. Now I'm going to deploy the container. And let me quickly look for a random Docker Hub Docker Compose file. So for example, this one, we're going to copy this one. This is going to spin up a Python app, Postgres. That's fine. Let's go back to Portainer. Let's go to the Stacks tab this time. Add a stack. And voting app is what they called it. Git repository. Give it the URL. And I believe it's master branch. Yep, master branch. Docker compose simple YAML. Click on deploy the stack. Oh, repository not found. I think I'm just supposed to give it this. The HTTPS. I gave it the blob. Deploy stack. Okay, sorry. Reference heads master. Third time's a charm. Oh, compose file version 3 is not supported. Well, uh-oh. Portainer, come on. Okay, so if we refresh our container list, we see that we have our TK4. Let's go ahead and open that. Let's see what's... So we can see that TK4 minus running on top of the Hercules mainframe emulator is running, which is cool. Nexus is running. Jenkins is running. And you could just, whatever comes into your head, you can use this to run it. But let's take a look at what it's created over here. So if we go to images, we can see the GitLab, Jenkins, Portainer. Oh, GitLab is the one I wanted to see. I don't see GitLab here. Maybe it's not done starting up. I know that it takes a long time for it to start up, so let's go to Docker images again. So we got GitLab, Jenkins, Portainer, TK4, Nexus. Then here are the volumes that were created. Then if we go back to the dashboard, we can see that there's 4 containers running, no stacks. There's 5 images taking up 3.5 gigs. Okay, so is Portainer for everyone? No. Some of you are really hardcore Docker guys that just want to do everything from the terminal. Some of you are using Kubernetes and don't see the point of this anyway. But some of you are either learning Docker or are perfectly happy using just individual Docker containers. Or if you're using Docker Swarm, this supports actually Docker Swarm as well, which it has its use cases as well compared to Kubernetes. Kubernetes is much more complicated than Docker Swarm. And I think this is a very nice tool. I'm glad it's still around. And right now, as far as a UI for running Docker containers that's not in the cloud, I think this is perfectly fine. It's a nice little application. It's lightweight, doesn't take up much resources. I like it. And hopefully some of you might want to try it out. I'd like to hear from you, see what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for joining me on this. I'll talk to you later.